Okay, hi, and welcome to the second edition of our live webinar podcast with myself and Simon Hay. We were live this morning, but unfortunately we were a victim of what is now being known as Zoom bombing. So I had no idea what that was until it happened to us today. And, it's a consequence right now of us trying to share the social media spaces and bring people together. So, a big piece of advice to anybody who's using Zoom, you've got to really be careful who you're sharing your links with, and make sure that when you share links with other people, they don't go on to share them with unknown entities or post them anywhere socially. So we had a couple of idiots who came on. We just decided to pull the call. There's no point in trying to fight the fire. Easier to pull the call. We're now going to record it, post it up on Facebook. So those who were on the call, apologies for that this morning. It wasn't a pleasant experience if you were with us, but we're still getting the content out. Life goes on. We push forward and we remain resilient. Simon.
That's right. Resilience is the key, and resilience is all about dealing with the unknowns and moving over them. So let's plow on, Justin.
Exactly. So we'll skip the parts about who we are. You can find all that kind of stuff on our LinkedIn profiles. Yep. We worked with a whole bunch of companies. We were going through our agenda, which is very quickly anxiety and leadership, key traits of effective leadership in a crisis, resilience. Then I'm going to do a bit of a macro update on the markets, what's going on, kind of economic situations that we see at the moment. And then we'll talk about the playbook, what you need to be doing. And I mentioned on the live call this morning, game strategy is now important. You must be able to figure out what your strategy is, but also have that as an ever evolving piece of strategy that you're working on each day. So each day you're updating your position and better understanding what last night's data, what this morning's data brings to that strategy. So to start off with, one of the things that we're really need to focus on is, as leaders, as people running businesses, running organizations, as managers, a sense of calmness. Understanding your capacity to lead is important, but also recognizing that those who are working with you are looking for some guidance. So really being able to change your state when crisis happens. So, things will go wrong. But before you even get to that, everything that you do today in many ways is investing in tomorrow's anxiety or diminishing tomorrow's anxiety. So how I eat today, making sure that I'm eating good, whole foods. I'm not eating junk. I'm not eating crap. How I sleep today, preparation for my sleep in the evening time. Some great resources you'll find on Google around, sleeping habits, and look for places like Forbes and these kind of journals where they talk about sleep environments and how you can do that. Diet is important, what you're eating, but also the water. How much water are you taking on? 2 liters a day. Time outside, even in these restricted times. Get outside, get some movement, clear your head. Make sure that you're getting the right vitamins on board, and don't be afraid to supplement if you need to. And quiet time. If you're thinking about making tough decisions in your business, make sure you've got clarity in your mind. And quiet time in a busy house right now can often just mean locking yourself in a bathroom and just taking 5 minutes to sit down, to breathe, to allow the mind to calm down and make rational decisions, because that's where leadership comes from. And especially if you're about to go on a call where you're leading a team electronically, just taking the time to orientate yourself, to calm down, so that when you come on, you're not kind of leaning in straight away and machine gun attack.
Yeah, I also think, Justin, after what happened this morning is a good example. It was unbalancing. It was unbalancing. I felt in my gut, got a little bit unbalanced. But I think there's two things about that: is not to ignore those unsettled feelings. Don't try and ignore them because they're real. Accept them, acknowledge them, but then go into a place where you can move around them and forward plan. And so that's what you and I have done with this. And the second thing that on balance is, is moderation. There's a lot of statistics going on right now about, the massive increase in alcoholic drinking, 232% online drinking in orders of alcohol in the States, and 86% increase in drinking in Australia. And while drinking is fine in moderation for people who can drink, just be really, really conscious that now is the time to moderate and balance and be careful and mind yourself. But don't think that avoiding your emotions is the way through. You need to acknowledge them, sit with them, but then work around them.
Completely. Moderation is key. And within moderation, just accepting that, some days are better than others, and challenges will arrive, and people will get in your way, as we experienced in our call this morning. And trying to have a sense of humor in these difficult times, so they interrupted our call, and they'll interrupt more calls, and these Zoom bombers will continue. But they're ultimately beings out there with extreme issues and pain going on in their own lives that are just acting out. So like some crazed idiot that cuts you up on the road, let them disappear off into the background, and you don't want to go chasing them down the road.
Yeah.
So key traits of effective leaderships in a crisis. So 4 key traits are calmness, an ability to listen, importance of being measured, which is so important, and then resilience. So calmness we spoke about, which is something that you have to kind of prepare yourself as you bring into it. You can't tell somebody to be calm, so it requires work and effort. You must put the preparation in ahead of showing up in a calm state. Ability and capacity to listen. So right now, you need to hold space and be there for your subordinates, for your stakeholders, for your family, for anybody in your life. You must have that capacity and that compassion to sit and be a good listener. It also means that you've got to have boundaries, because if you have an open forum with staff, you've got to be able to also cut people into time schedules so that you don't end up getting somebody hogging all the space. Importance being measured. Simon said exactly that. If you think about, alcohol, not drinking too much, but if you think about, our obsession to move towards our negative bias, to seek out all the bad news. If you want a lot of bad news right now, it is in abundance. So being measured in the context of when you're going to take news, and, consider deleting news apps off your phone and decide that your news hour is 11 and 5 or 11 and 8 or 11 and 9. And then in between those times, you delete those news apps or the social media apps. Be measured in your social and your internet time. And all of these things then build to that sense of resilience. Sorry, Simon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, don't forget, there is still a huge amount of good news in the world. There isn't a time now since World War II that all the smartest mathematicians and physicians and pharmacists and research companies are coming together to find vaccines and antibodies, and that's wonderful, and I think huge amount of innovation and new thinking and new products will come out of this. I was on a call last night with about 25 people, and one person mentioned that on the call. There was a lot of doom and gloom on it, and you could almost feel like a raft of hope was thrown into the call, and you could almost feel a sigh of relief. Oh, we'd forgotten that there is actually good news in the world. There's tons of good news in the world.
Absolutely. Completely. And we must kind of plug into that. And then in the context of building our own capacity to be resilient and our capacity to be calm, helps us then build this ability to have vision. So leadership right now is not about what's happening today, what's happening tomorrow. It's having the capacity to use game strategy to have a vision of where your business is going to be in the next 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and then 18 months, 2 years, because we're in an interesting curve of how the economy is going to perform. So, on the acute phase right now, you're trying to keep the patient alive and on the table, but you also need to think about when the patient comes through this acute phase and you take them off that life support that so many of us have in our businesses, that you're then able to see what does rehabilitation look like? How do you get your business back to a point where it's trading and performing? So vision is critical.
Correct.
And then just brings us on to resilience.
Yeah, resilience, it really is, and it's being tested in all of us right now, but it's the capacity to cope with life, how you manage your emotional behavioral response to whatever is happening, either in you, self-resilience, happening in society, and mad things like, hacking and all these sort of things and scams will happen. So it's how you respond to those. And then life itself, I mean, don't forget, our lives are moving on. And so we need to accept that, okay, it's a bit of a diversion. It's a big diversion, but we still need to live our lives. We still need to enjoy, spending time with our family and enjoying simple food, and don't lose sight of the fact that life is actually happening, right? So don't get hung up on all the negativity. Resilience, having said all that, it's a learned skill. We're born resilient, but we learn to be fearful. And we pick up a lot of this from our parents. If they were anxious or were fearful themselves, we're likely to have picked those things up. So we really need to deconstruct a lot of this. And I've done a lot of this work on myself with you, Justin, over the last year or so in particular. And I've noticed that some of those fears have really dissolved. The resonance, the frequency of them has really dissolved. But it's a constant body of work. So resilience is something we need to be very mindful of, and we need to work at it.
Absolutely. And I think, the learned behavior thing is key. However you're feeling about anxiety right now, kind of sit with it, understand it, and notice it. And now's not the time to try and resolve your anxiety issues, because we're in an acute stage of trying to survive these issues in businesses and life. But possibly just being aware and noticing it when it arrives, and also noticing that if you sit through it, it'll pass, get you back to the point where you can think straight. But
yeah,
simple things like breathing exercises, so sitting down, taking deep breaths in, breathing out slowly, can help you move to a point where you get a greater capacity to get back into your prefrontal cortex. So your executive function is key right now.
So just before we move on to 5 slides on what businesses and leadership should be doing, Justin, just maybe give us in a minute or so what you see as the main macroeconomic issues really facing businesses for the next 6 months.
Sure. Okay. So my background, I'm a certified investment fund director, so I have a specialism in kind of macroeconomics and the investment markets and financial markets, and kind of interpreting data and understanding what that is actually speaking to us in the context of the ever unfolding picture right now for us all economically. I think, last week, if you listened previously to our podcast, or if you were in a live session last week, I was speaking quite negatively about how I saw things, even though there was a lot of people talking up the markets and saying that things might be okay and now's a good time to invest. I still feel very cautious in that whole sense of where people need to go. And without going into too much technicalities about what the equity markets are showing us, what's clear right now is that we have significant discounts into companies. But what we haven't yet had discounted into the share price is the profit to earning ratio. So the profit to earning ratio has not yet caught up with the discount on the actual capital value of companies, so the actual share price. We're going to see huge swathes of dividends. And as an example, the FTSE has a very strong reliance on the banking sector, and now all their dividends are being withheld, and probably rightly so, because that ultimately underpins the strength of a bank's balance sheet. But as that starts to unfold, I think we'll see further discounts in the equity markets. And I think then in the context of business and trying to handle what the future look like from a macroeconomic perspective, we will see greater deterioration in confidence when we see higher levels, unfortunately, of death and loss and tragedy in our societies. And I think this will also have an impact on people's capacity to feel comfortable about spending, investing, and growing. And in terms of recovery, there's the V shape, the U shape, the swoosh, the L. All these things are being spoken about. I think it's we're talking about a W-shaped recovery now, and I don't necessarily think it's a W. I think it's almost like a potential kind of upturn U that will get us back to a point where we start to improve. But I think there's a very significant risk of another decline relatively soon thereafter, because what we haven't seen or we don't understand completely yet is the second wave of this pathogen. And what happens when we start to see this come back out again? So right now we tighten down all our measures, we secure, but then people go back into society again in a few months' time, and that might rise the level of infectiousness. So for all these reasons, I think, from a personal perspective, managing your own household, managing your own cash, managing your own investments, from a business perspective, managing your own business. And then, as we said at the start, from a personal capacity, managing your own health, you got to protect the mothership at all times. And I think that means tough decisions. You got to cut costs, because whatever plan you have, if your strategy right now doesn't show, near zero of sales in the next 2 to 3 or 4 months, then you haven't got to your baseline yet. You need to go right down to your baseline. And let's just hope that's not a reality. But please make sure that you plan for the worst case scenario, so you understand what's going to happen in your business in that strategy.
Absolutely. And, as it says on this slide, this is a different crisis. Previous crisis, caused by financial bubbles, economic monetary policy mistakes, oil. I think this is really a global shock caused by a health-induced supply and demand side failure. And, you mentioned the different models of recovery. I was just listening to the radio just literally 10 minutes before this, and I think what could come out of it is different models for different industries. So, aviation and hotels and retails could have a much longer upward curve. So, and I think, so this is a different cause of crisis, but standard crisis management procedures always kick in. And, we've talked about here, leadership resilience will be best displayed by those leaders who display real clarity of thought, effective communications, strong but compassionate decision-making. You talk about the 3 brains, Justin. I don't know whether you just want to quickly recap on that.
Yeah, sure. Just one extra point to add on to that whole business idea, and that is, I spoke to somebody yesterday in the US who has a business that's had a very, very successful month in the context of his kind of online sales that gone really well. He's had like a near record month. And he was talking about the fact that, his retail side of his business is absolutely being hammered right now, but his online business is effectively countering that, and his sales have risen. I just asked him one question, though. I said, have you modeled in the US Postal Service not being able to operate for 4 to 6 weeks, or for that matter, for wherever we're watching, your postal service? So for businesses that are reliant on post, please build your models in to show what your cash flow looks like if you have 0 sales for a period of time. I hope that doesn't happen to you, but I would really advise you heavily to make sure that that's part of your planning.
Exactly.
So the 3 brains, really important. Our gut instinct is critical. And for those of us who've been in the game for long enough, we have a huge level of experience, and we can often rely on our capacity to just listen to our gut. The head is where the monkey mind is. It's where the chatter is. And often it's the negative bias. It's the thing that draws you towards all the negative news and the doom and gloom approach to what it's telling you to do, which is, fight, run, flee the problem. So being able to understand that, our gut instinct is there to guide us. So listen to your gut instinct. Take that time to just sit with yourself before you make a big decision. Connect into the gut instinct. Follow your heart, understand what's really going on, and don't just assume that what goes on up here is the right decision. Consult all 3.
Correct. I mean, I've been tempted to think about going into stock markets and all that sort of stuff. My gut is telling me, so that's my head. My gut is saying, light a fire and stay in my cave with my family. And I think that's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So moving on, leaders need, this is really important, leaders need to be transparent and honorable. It's really important for resilient leaders to be as honest as they can corporately, including in relation to unknowns and facts they don't have all the answers to. I think those leaders, and we won't mention any, who pretend to know will be flushed out, because a lot of the staff, don't forget, are as smart, if not smarter. So be transparent and as honest as you can be. And I suppose the flip side, the worst thing you can do is to leave festering voids, communication voids in your workforce. Because as you said, Justin, the brain naturally veers towards the negative. So staff naturally will become worried and fill their own voids. Equally important is to try and maintain a single tone of delivering in terms of the resonance and the timbre of how you deliver messages. Don't be unduly excitable. Don't be unduly negative. And I guess the most important thing for me here, and you might just quickly comment on it in a little bit, Justin, is trust. We all know what lack of trust feels like. We all know when we feel we don't trust somebody or something, but to actually define what trust is very hard. And the flip side of that is, as a result of that, it's very easy to lose trust, because human beings are veered towards feeling what it doesn't feel like. And the same applies to brands. Brands can lose their value very quickly if people feel like they don't trust them. Do you want to add anything on that, Justin?
I agree. I think from a trust perspective, corporate messaging is key. So what you speak to now is going to define how people interpret your brand going forward. So, you may have built up, 20 years of good communication, of positive imagery in the context of your business. But if you misspeak right now, people's emotions are fired up, and you will draw a wrath of criticism. So communication of your message is so important so that people can trust you. And I think open, honest communication is critical. Ethical communication is critical, and if you have a product that can help people, and they can benefit from, don't be afraid to promote it. And equally, don't be afraid to say that you have to get paid for it. When we were sharing these podcasts free and sharing our time free, because we want to give back to our community, but we also need to be aware that people do need to make money to sustain their businesses. But just be, collaborative in your own team about your message. The leaders who are going to really help you right now in your team are maybe not the people that were effective 3 months ago. In a war room, different leaders show up. So allow staff and teams to be critical and say, that's not a great message. I think that could be interpreted as X rather than what we want it to be.
Exactly. And we'll talk a little bit more of that in the next couple of slides. What this slide is talking about, resilient leadership delivers through obscurity. You talk a lot about this, Justin, is that strong leadership requires decisive action through expedient action rather than being hung up on perfection. Progress, not perfection, because perfection in crisis times is almost impossible. It's a moving target. So rely on as much data as you can, but I think the best leaders are going to rely on really strong gut instinct, patterns, allow for innovation and collaboration. I mentioned Apple there, the iPod and then the various inventions that came after that all came out of a period where Apple was struggling and allowed engineers time to innovate and collaborate. Create a culture of what if, allow controlled mistakes to happen. So culture up underpins a lot of this stuff in organizations, and there's a lot of lip service around culture, but I think this is critically important right now. Justin, anything to add to this whole area of expedient decision making rather than perfect hung up decision making?
Absolutely. I think in a crisis, indecision kills. And there's no question about that. Indecision in a business is going to cause you huge implications in the context of your cash flow, your capacity to trade. It's the same as what we're seeing in the medical world right now. They're having to make tough decisions. They're never going to get it right. There'll be lessons to be learned when they look back, but they have to be decisive to try and save as much life as they can. And in our businesses, the same policy in the context of crisis management is here. So we must improvise. We must avoid indecision at all costs and make a decision. Don't get caught, procrastinating, because it will kill your business. It will disincentivize your staff. Your stakeholders will lose confidence. You must strike the capacity to be a bold and prominent leader who's willing to take risks, die by those risks, but ultimately look to seek the survival of his organization by being bold in these really difficult times.
No, you're right. I mean, it says there, assume an environment of safe fail rather than fail safe.
Yeah, completely agree.
So resilient leadership also ensures steady purpose and mission. So at these times, it's really important for leaders to maintain as much as they can the purpose of the organization and the mission of the organization, because people are constantly looking at this. Don't think that you're not being watched by your stakeholders. So it's very important to maintain critical impact command centers to do this, financial stress testing, stay engaged with customers, supply chains, banks, lenders, and strengthen and experiment and refine digital capabilities, as we found this morning. We need to. There are other platforms out there other than just Zoom and Skype, and I think we all need to look at all these. So, in terms of financial stress testing, Justin, anything else you want to add to that in terms of how periodic, whether small businesses need to look at this differently from large businesses?
Yeah, I mean, look, for small businesses who probably don't necessarily run cash flow statements and cash flow analysis, cash flow is key right now. It's king in this environment. So managing your cash flow on a week by week or day by day basis is how I would be working this. So bringing your accounts team into play to understand what have we got, what's coming in, what's going out, managing the payments going out of your bank account, who are you paying, what are you paying, and then in the context of your creditors, getting in front of those creditors quickly and looking to buy some time, and if it's forbearance on capital payments for 3 or 4 months and the interest rolls on, take everything that you can, because, build up your cash reserves right now and deal with, interest payments later on. Don't try and think, well, I'll avoid potentially taking on some debt. If you have your worst case model and you are able to see that you will run out of cash in that worst case model, secure your credit lines now, and bring that in, because it is really, really so important to understand in the context of doing that. And again, in the presentation to your creditors, whether it's your landlord or your bank or whoever is your creditor pool, putting a presentation together and writing to them and explaining why you'll still be here after this recession, because everybody's asking them for forbearance, and they're going to be, giving the best terms to the ones that they think will still be their clients in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months time. So, make sure that you put your best foot forward. You show that you're calm and capable, but you also give them a projection to show that you've done the numbers, you back up your business, you're comfortable and confident they can do it. Don't just do a scattergun of saying, I'm screwed, please help me.
Just move back one slide, just very briefly. I call this democratic decision-making, dictatorial execution, which was a quote from a previous employer, CEO of an American company. Resilient leaders operate through the dual prisons of calm. We've mentioned this, but also they need to be clinically, sometimes ruthless, but within a prism of compassion. So it's really important to maintain health and well-being of the workforce, stakeholders, and be mindful of societal sensitivities as a priority, followed by economic well-being, but also to balance the more hard-nosed surgical financial protective measures, as we've discussed. Companies need to be very careful about using leadership levers like freezes, layoffs, reconfigurations. And Justin, just to recap on this, you're very clear that companies need to think how to do things, but also how not to do things at this time.
Yes, absolutely. So, strategy and understanding about what you're doing is so important. And I think, unfortunately, an element of ruthlessness is important. But again, it goes back to my earlier comments, which is protect the mothership. You can only employ people in the future or re-employ people in the future if you still have a business to do that from. So you have to make tough decisions. It's often, in Eastern philosophy, the idea of a Zen warrior, is like an oxymoron, right? How can you be Zen and how can you be a warrior? But even for people who are Zen practitioners and monks, at times they would come under attack. And when they're under attack, they need to be able to step into a capacity to defend themselves. So this is kind of like offense is the best defense right now. So in your business, you've got to kind of lead, you've got to take tough calls. You're going to have to lay people off. You're going to have to, buy time from creditors. You're going to have to do whatever you need to do to make sure that you survive, because then you can be part of the economy going forward.
And then resilient leadership provides a bridge to the future. So, structural markets are shifting, evolving. This is going to accelerate new types of communication, biotech, online business. There's a question here we were going to open up for the open forum today, but should we ever return to exactly the way we were before? That's unlikely. The calmest, most open-minded, forward-thinking leaders should drive the weight of innovation, striking a balance between short and long term. So that's providing the bridge from current expediency to future vision. And those leaders who shape the future of their industry should be rewarded, as should crucially those who acknowledge the often amazing contribution of employees. It's not just, we're all leaders in our organizations, Justin. We're not just the CEO. Those amazing nurses on the front line, they're leading the health profession globally.
Completely agree. So mindset for growth and mindfulness to sustain it. So in order to make significant change, we must set the intention. So clear, decisive decisions about what you are doing in your business and making sure that you've got a plan and you've got a strategy to create that environment where I can execute on my intention. So at times, maybe your leadership team changes right now. You call in those people who've got a capacity to deal with a crisis. Who is that great person in a crisis that you've always known is in your team? They may not be in your senior team, but maybe this is a war room setting. So bring up people who you think can navigate this well with you. And then creating clear set of objectives to work towards your goals. So, breaking it down so people know on a day-by-day basis, what are they supposed to do? Don't set some grandiose goal as to how you're going to survive this. You can have that in your top macro plan, but then you must give direction. People are working from home. They don't have the same level of interaction as before. So make sure there's clear guidance as to what's expected. In order to sustain the behavior, I must have a conditioned mind and body. Take care of yourself. Take time in the morning to exercise, to breathe. If you've ever used meditation before or mindfulness, tap into these kind of resources. Get outside for a walk. Don't start the day by going straight into your first meeting by jumping off the latest news feed. Slow down a little bit, breathe, and then start your meetings. Before you start any meeting with anybody, take 2 minutes to just take a few deep breaths in and breathe out, because otherwise you're going to run in with a busy mind. Understand your triggers, your fears, and the negative voices. If stuff is triggering you and it's upsetting you, change it tomorrow. So if you've been on the news too much today and you feel anxious at the end of the day, tomorrow have less news. Mindset is the intention, and mindfulness is the ability to sustain it. So it's in all embodying parts of it. Bring the whole thing together and understand that you take care of yourself, you protect your mothership. You take care of your family, you protect your family mothership. And then you take care of your business or your team, you protect your business mothership. Always protect the core. At times that means you will have to lose people along the way, but hopefully, God willing, you can bring them back because you've protected the core.
Yeah. So just to conclude, a quote, and I'm probably not quoting it completely correctly, but Napoleon Hill said that society and business will forgive mistakes, but it won't forgive indecision. So this really is a time for action, including, nesting in and making those, those nesting type decisions. That is action. But I think for businesses, it's critical to not to bury their head in the sand. And I think that's a key message that comes out of this presentation.
Absolutely. Plan, and work forward. Plan your next week, your next month, your next 3 months, your next 6 months, your next 9 months. There must be a plan within incremental time slots. It's that old adage, fail to plan to fail. It's never truer than in a time of crisis.
Exactly. Thank you. Thanks, Justin.
Okay, thanks everybody. We will go live again next week. We're looking at our security settings and consulting with Zoom, so we'll be password protecting. We're also going to set up a WhatsApp group, so you must be in our WhatsApp group in order to get the password just before we go live. So we'll have a WhatsApp group live. So those people who've communicated with me and Simon and I, just reconnect with us on messaging, on LinkedIn, on Instagram, on emails, or WhatsApp, and let's get the WhatsApp group set up, which will then add you to, and then just before the next Zoom meeting goes live, that password will be shared. So it'll only be people that we know and trust that we come in, and we please ask you, don't share any of our meeting links on social media. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. You can find more about us on mindsetandmindfulness.com. You can read about Simon on simonhay.com and Justin on justincaffrey.com. But for now, thanks for coming on board. Thanks for watching us on whatever social channel you've picked this up. And please do share this with anybody who you may feel could benefit from the little bits of wisdom that we've shared today over our time in business and in life. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.